He was an American hero. His name was Alvin York. On October 8th, 1918, he and his platoon were pinned down by enemy fire and suffering heavy casualties. Among those casualties were 3 higher officers. This made Corporal Alvin York in charge of those remaining in the platoon. He led his men and charged the enemy position, working his way into a position where he could place fire on the enemy machine gun nest. Through his daring moves, fearful attack, the enemy machine guns were captured along with 128 enemy soldiers. He and 7 of his men remained. Corporal Alvin York was promoted to sergeant. And for his extraordinary bravery and courage, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Alvin York had a choice to make. He could sit back, stand idly by, or he could take action. He took action to save the lives of his men. He was steady, he was brave, he shot to save. Today, you've heard what happened on the event on December 7th, 1996. And Officer Waldman, he was faced with a choice. He could stand idly by, or he could take action. Sergeant York was awarded as a hero. He was promoted, but where's Officer Waldman's promotion? You as the jury have the opportunity today to at least find him innocent. Judge Judy will soon read to you some jury instructions. She'll explain that it is your job today to determine whether Officer Waldman's actions on the night of December 7th, 1996 were reasonable, or whether they were wanton or negligent. The plaintiff has the burden of proof in this case. Judge Judy will explain that Mr. Ramirez must prove by a preponderance of the evidence that Officer Waldman did not act reasonably, or that he acted unreasonably. The preponderance of the evidence, that means more likely than not. And when you're making that decision, consider the police department's policy. They have a policy on the use of deadly force. Their policy is instituted to protect life, but it allows an officer to use deadly force to prevent death or bodily harm to the officer or another person. Officer Waldman used deadly force on the night of December 7th, 1996 to save the life of his partner, Officer Levy. As he got out of the car on that night, that early morning, and looked over the roof of the car, he saw Robert Ramirez, who had already begun fighting with his partner. He saw him with a knife in his hands. And he saw Mr. Ramirez raise that knife back and stab his partner in the shoulder, in the left shoulder. And as he rounded the back of the car to see what he could do to help, he saw Mr. Ramirez raise that knife back a second time and prepared to stab his partner for the second time. Officer Waldman was faced with a choice. Officer Waldman didn't have time to make his decision. And he made the decision to shoot to save. He made that decision as a last resort to save the life of his partner. Now, you've heard a different story today from Robert Ramirez. You've heard a story that he didn't have a knife, that he didn't touch a knife. You know, in fact, there was a knife found at the scene of the crime. And in fact, Officer Levy was checked into the hospital with a cut wound. Mr. Ramirez has told you his side of the story. He has made some arguments. You've heard testimony today that he's left-handed. Oh, and since he's left-handed, he that means that he didn't stab him with the right hand. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Officer Waldman saw him stab his partner. And ladies and gentlemen, you've heard him talk about inconsistencies. About inconsistencies in the testimony of the officers. Ladies and gentlemen, opposing counsel has told you that their own stories didn't agree, that they didn't quite agree with the police report, and that they don't agree with circumstantial evidence. Well, ladies and gentlemen, their stories aren't exactly consistent with each other. They're close. They're very close to the police report. The police report says 10 feet. They say a couple feet. It was early in the morning. They were using their best judgment, but they were a few feet off. If we're to believe that these officers are lying, that they're involved in a contrived conspiracy, wouldn't they get the facts right? If they're making this up, there wouldn't be these little inconsistencies. You see, the little inconsistencies actually, in fact, have a ring of truth to them. Mr. Ramirez also would like you to believe that he never touched the knife. But we know, in fact, that that's not true. He will want you to believe that there are no. He will explain that there are no fingerprints on the knife, and that there's no evidence of any blood. But ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, the knife that was examined for those fingerprints was not the same knife that was found at trial. The knife that was found at that was examined was unfortunately a knife that had been found at a burglary. You see, the knives had been mishandled and mixed up, and so unfortunately, when they examined the knife, it was not the right one. If they had examined the knife that Mr. Ramirez used to stab Officer Levy, do you think they would have found fingerprints on the knife? Ladies and gentlemen, also the expert testimony in this case. You heard some experts testify, and these experts testified. Mr. Ramirez expert testified about how there was movement, and this meant that he was getting up off the ground. But you heard the Dr. What's his name? Dr. Marshall. You heard Dr. Marshall testify that actually what most likely happened was Mr. Ramirez was struggling, was fighting, was leaning back with that knife to stab Officer Levy, and that's in fact when he was shot, based on his review of the records and the evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, Mr. Ramirez would like you to believe that because the knife was closed, because it was found closed, this means that he didn't have the knife. But again, ladies and gentlemen, if these officers are lying to you, if this is some conspiracy, if they planted that knife, why would it be closed? Why would they plant it closed? You heard testimony from Officer Waldman and Officer Levy about what happened. You heard that Mr. Ramirez raised that knife and had stabbed Officer Levy. The hospital records confirm that he was checked into the hospital with a cut wound. Officer Levy made a difficult choice. He was steady, he was brave, and he shot to save. He acted heroically. Will you reward him as a hero? And at least find him innocent today? Police officers must be able to perform their duties. They must be able to make decisions in a split second. And they must not have a fear for future litigation as long as their actions are reasonable. Officer Waldman shot to save the life of his partner. This is reasonable. I ask you to check not liable on the jury form. Thank you.